There's a certain sound that older British haulers still talk about when they gather at truck stops on cold mornings. Steam rising from their tea, memories drifting back decades. It's the deep, unmistakable growl of a Gardner engine firing up in the pre-dawn darkness. The mechanical symphony of a David Brown gearbox clicking through its gears. And the steady rumble of an ERF lorry heading out onto rain-soaked motorways with a full load behind it. That sound, that feeling, that badge, square, bold, and defiantly British, represented something more than just transportation. It represented pride, independence, the unshakable belief that Britain could build lorries as tough as anywhere else in the world, maybe tougher. But today, if you search for ERF on the roads, you'll find only ghosts. Beautifully restored relics at truck shows, faded photographs in transport museums, and the memories of drivers who refuse to let the name die. This is the story of how one of Britain's greatest truck manufacturers rose from a family disagreement to challenge giants across the globe, only to be slowly, quietly, and tragically erased from existence. This is the rise and collapse of ERF, a legend lost forever. The year was 1933, and the British haulage industry stood at a crossroads. Steam power, which had dominated for decades, was gasping its last breath, while diesel engines promised a faster, more efficient future. But not everyone saw it coming. Edwin Richard Foden, a brilliant engineer whose surname would become synonymous with British trucking, found himself locked in bitter disagreement with his own family company about which direction to take. He called it ERF, his own initials, a quiet act of defiance and determination. From the very first lorry that rolled out of the modest factory, ERF wasn't about flash or glamour. It was about engineering that worked. It was about building machines that British haulers could trust on narrow country lanes, steep Pennine passes, and through the kind of weather that would stop lesser vehicles in their tracks. And word spread quickly. This wasn't some corporate giant churning out cookie-cutter trucks. This was a family operation, tight-knit and proud, where every lorry carried the soul of the men who built it. What made ERF different wasn't just its philosophy, it was its approach. While other manufacturers tried to control every aspect of production, ERF took a different path. They hand-picked the finest components from the best suppliers in Britain and beyond. Gardner engines, legendary for their reliability and fuel efficiency. David Brown gearboxes, smooth and unbreakable. Kirkstall axles, built to handle punishment. ERF became like a master chef in a Michelin-starred kitchen, selecting only the finest ingredients and combining them into something extraordinary. And because it was family-run, because Edwin Richard Foden himself walked the factory floor and knew his workers by name, there was an authenticity to every vehicle that left the gates. Mechanics loved working on ERF lorries because they were logical, well-designed, and built to be maintained rather than replaced. Drivers trusted them because they knew that somewhere in Cheshire, real people had cared enough to get every detail right. Fleet operators swore by them because an ERF didn't just work, it kept working, year after year, mile after mile. By the 1950s and 60s, ERF had become a fixture of British roads. Their classic upright cabs, boxy and utilitarian, offered unbeatable visibility. The LV and KV series became workhorses across the nation, hauling timber in Scotland, moving steel from Sheffield, carrying construction materials to building sites across the country. They weren't pretty, but they were perfect for the job. The 1970s brought evolution. The B series arrived with slightly more modern styling, but maintained that no-nonsense ERF character. Then came the C series, with improved driver comfort, better interiors, and a nod toward the future without abandoning the past. But ERF wasn't content to stay on British soil. Their lorries began appearing in Australia, working the brutal outback routes. They showed up in South Africa, moving freight across vast distances. They rolled onto European motorways, competing head-to-head with continental manufacturers. Then came the 1980s, and with it, the first warning signs that the world ERF knew was changing. ERF's traditional approach, mixing and matching the best components, suddenly looked old-fashioned in a market that demanded standardization and mass production. But ERF didn't surrender easily. By the mid-1990s, the writing was appearing on the wall, scrawled in red ink across balance sheets that wouldn't balance anymore. The ECX model, launched as ERF's next generation, was thoroughly German in everything but nameplate. For veteran drivers who'd grown up with true ERF lorries, it felt like betrayal. The ruggedness, the modular simplicity, the distinctly British character, all gone, replaced by corporate efficiency and continental design philosophy. Meanwhile, back in Middlewich, the factory that had been the beating heart of ERF for decades was running on fumes. Production slowed to a trickle. Loyal workers, men and women who dedicated their entire careers to building British lorries, watched helplessly as their company slipped away. The tragedy of ERF isn't that they built bad lorries. They never did. The tragedy is timing. The world changed, got faster, bigger, more corporate. The qualities that made ERF special, independence, craftsmanship, personal connection, became disadvantages in a global market that demanded scale and standardization. But that doesn't mean ERF failed. For nearly 7 decades, they gave Britain a homegrown alternative to continental giants. They trained generations of drivers and mechanics. They moved goods, built cities, kept the economy humming along quietly, reliably, and with pride. That's not failure, that's legacy. And that legacy lives on, not in showrooms or dealerships, but in the rumble of a well-maintained ECX, still pulling a low-loader on a foggy morning. It lives in the conversations between aging drivers at transport cafes, swapping stories about long-haul runs and nights spent sleeping in laybys, with the engine humming beside them like a trusted companion. It lives in the scent of old diesel and worn leather that still lingers in 30-year-old cabs. It lives in a certain British stubbornness that refuses to forget. So while ERF may no longer roll off any production line, while that square badge may never grace a new lorry again, the name endures. Not in corporate boardrooms or marketing campaigns, but where it always mattered most, on the road, in the hearts of those who drove them, and in the stubborn collective memory of a nation that once built lorries as tough as its people. That's the mark of a proper legend, one that doesn't need chrome or slogans to survive. Just a square badge, a stretch of tarmac, and a story worth remembering forever.